All righty. As we watch everyone kind of trickle in here. Thank you all so much for joining us. Good evening. You are here for our live virtual event with author duo Smith Henderson and Jon Marc Smith to celebrate their new thriller, Make Them Cry. We are so excited to have fellow writer Chad Dundas joining them in conversation this evening. I'm your host, Jessica, the event coordinator here at Country Bookshelf, and we are grateful to be here in this virtual space with our fellow Books in Common Northwest doors, Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington. Be sure to visit booksincommonnw.com for more information and follow us on Eventbrite to register for more great Books in Common events. Before we get to Smith, Jon Marc, and Chad, we wanted to point out a few things about this virtual space. We are recording the event, and it will be viewable on booksincommonnw.com as well as the Books in Common Northwest YouTube channel after the event concludes. There is a link to buy a copy of all the authors' books in the chat, and it should reappear periodically. Just click on the logo of your favorite supporting store to fill up your shopping cart with all the great goodies. If you have a question for any of our authors, just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to them as time allows. You can also see the questions other folks have asked and even vote on which questions you'd most like to hear the answer to. Finally, if you run into any tech issues along the way, please feel free to exit and re-enter the webinar. If you can't get back in, we hope you'll visit the Books in Common Northwest YouTube channel to watch there live. We also recommend trying headphones to fix any sound issues. We do want to remind you that this is a shared creative space, that we want to remain safe for everyone, and ask that you be respectful of everyone who has joined us this evening. Offensive or inappropriate comments or questions will see the user dismissed from the space. Without further ado, Smith Henderson is the author of the acclaimed 4th of July Creek and lives in California and Montana. Jon Marc teaches English at Texas State University and lives in San Marcos. Make Them Cry is their first novel together. Chad Dundas earned his MFA from the University of Montana, and his short fiction has appeared in the Beloit Fiction Journal, Sycamore Review, Sou'wester, and Thug Lit. Since 2001, he's worked as a sports writer for national outlets, including ESPN, NBC Sports, Sporting News, Bleacher Report, and the Associated Press, as well as local and regional newspapers. A fourth-generation Montanan, he lives with his wife and children in Missoula. Thank you both all so much for joining us this evening. Smith, did you want to take it away and read a little for us?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for that introduction and hosting us, and welcome everybody. I wanted to read a little bit from the book after I kind of set the table. It's a thriller that Jon Marc and I have been working on for quite a long while. It's gone through a lot of changes. We can talk a little bit about that. But the story begins with a drug enforcement agency agent named Diane Harbaugh, who is she's having some crises at work. Basically, they're kind of come to a head in the first chapter when an act of surprising violence sets her on kind of a collision path with her supervisors and colleagues. Realizing that she's in sort of a tough situation, she jumps at the opportunity to try and make things right when a cartel member that she met several years ago, who she gave a card to, calls her out of the blue, and he turns out to be much advanced in the cartel, and it sounds like he might be quite a catch for her. So throwing kind of caution to the wind, she decides to go down to Tampico, Mexico to meet with this guy, and needless to say, complications ensue. There's a variety of threads from the US government to the war in Afghanistan to various cartels to the CIA, all converging on this cartel member who looks like he has a very important secret. The portion I'd like to read is actually from a section where a Sicario named Tomas has been after the person that Diane has been with, the cartel member. He calls him the nephew, just for context in this. And so I'll just read a short little kind of actiony, exciting portion of the book, and then we can start chatting. Tomas plunged out of the cab and onto the ground to take cover behind the Econoline's left front end. He didn't even hear the shots. Thought he'd been hit in the ear. Gone deaf. He had to move. He dove back inside the cab and reached for the .45 on the seat, but the gun wouldn't come. His hand was slick. He had no grip. He looked at his hand like you would an empty pen. Blood everywhere. The entire right side of him, wet and leaking. He peeked into a pocket of clear glass in the windshield and saw the nephew walking from across the street, squared up, gun flashing as he advanced on the van, 15 meters away and closing. Tomas tried his other hand, the left, but the gun slid onto the floor. He wiped his palm on his lap. He leaned and reached into the console for the other pistol. He put it under his right armpit and was able to hold it there and cock it. He looked at the blood all over and tried to gauge how much he'd lost. He peeked around the open driver's side door and then around the front bumper, the small nose of the van not giving him much cover. The nephew was angling, taking a semicircle path to get a better shot. The shock had worn off and Tomas could hear the shots now. Pop, pop, pop. He scrambled backwards as the headlights exploded. The front tire exhaled and the van slumped. He took a step sideways away from the van and fired in the man's direction just to ward him off, slow him down. The nephew veered, the vehicle between them again. Even now, Tomas thought they might talk. He stepped back to the cab and set the pistol on the driver's seat, picked up the .45 and was able to hold on to it this time, stuffed it in his waistband, and then with the other pistol fired 2 wild shots through the windshield at the nephew. His right arm was limp. He had to go. Through the spiderweb windshield, Tomas saw the nephew running sidelong to get in front of the van. He threw another wild one around the bumper, and then Tomas crouched and backwalked along the side. Liquid bubbled. The radiator hissed. The nephew came around the front of the van, shaking a plastic bag off of a fresh gun, and fired as Tomas leapt behind it. Bullets dimpled the rear door after penetrating the sidewall. Thomas slunk around the rear to the passenger side. The vehicle pinged like some kind of busted saxophone playing quarter notes. Then quiet. The pain focused him for a moment, and he realized his right arm was a mess. He was shot through the tricep, maybe also in the heel of that same hand, but that might be glass. He could only fire one gun at a time. He didn't think he'd bleed to death, but he didn't know it. He felt the other man bump up against the other side of the vehicle, a chance to parley. "Hey," Tomas called out, "let's talk. We don't have to do this." No reply. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "I'm not here to kill you." He could hear the nephew edge along the side of the van, corner, and lean against the back of it, so close they could hear one another breathing, the only sound on the deserted street. Tomas stepped back, dropped the pistol on the ground so he could open the passenger door with his good left hand, and then removed the .45 from his pants and squared up behind the door. He aimed at the back corner of the van. "I'm only here to talk, that's all. I'm alone." No reply. "You shot me, man. Come out. I want to talk." Nothing. And then the nephew swung around the back of the van. Tomas let 4 shots go, the .45 heavy and violent in his palm, all right into the man's chest. The nephew fell, his legs bending beneath him, his shoulder hitting the ground, and then his body flopped up and sprung over, leaving him chest down in the dirt. Blood spread on his shirt. Soft steps behind him. He turned and was immediately slapped backward, and he was looking up at the sky and those cottony clouds. That's what he saw. Somehow he was seeing anything at all. How did that happen? Where was he? He tried to move, but all he could manage was lifting his head. The DEA woman stood there barefoot, maybe 10 meters away with a pistol in both hands aimed at him. She was looking at him and then past him at the dead man, which is when he leveled his gun at her as best he could. "I just wanted to talk." He was speaking Spanish and he wasn't sure hers was any good. He could feel his focus ebbing, couldn't see her eyes, her intentions. He fired and fired. His head fell back from the effort. He expected to be shot again, but then all he heard were soft steps, receding, receding, receding. So yeah, thanks for letting me read that.
Thanks for reading it. Smith, Jon Marc, thanks for having me here. I wanted to say and agreeing to answer my questions about Make Them Cry, which I just finished last week, and it is amazing. I would
Thanks, bud.
recommend to everyone to run out and buy it. I guess, first of all, I wanted to ask you guys what is probably the first question that you guys always get asked, and that is, how did you guys meet? And then how do two fellas go about building the kind of relationship that leads them to become writing partners?
Well, we met in Texas 20 years ago. I remember because it was Bush v. Gore, which I don't remember what specifically we talked about. We were angry, I'm sure. We were very angry. But yeah, 20 years ago, we met. I was in an MFA program at Texas State University, and Smith was just sort of hanging around. He's like, like one of those stray dogs that gather around MFA programs, they're like, they're not getting enough food at home or something. So he would come out and join all the wannabe writers that would go out and have drinks afterwards and after workshop. And I don't remember exactly when, I don't remember our first meeting, but we were fairly, we got along pretty quickly, even though we like to yell at each other about things and argue a lot, which I think was actually the fact that we like to argue and like to yell at each other sometimes. I think that actually was a really, that we can do that and still be great friends, I think is something that really actually was a good preview for the fact that we could work together, really.
Yeah, I remember, I think the first time we had a one-on-one conversation was just because you got out of workshop ahead of everybody and had a pint, and I was like already there to meet like Melissa, Neil, and we just had to talk to each other, and then we just, I don't know, just kind of started shooting shit. And like, and then, I mean, our writing partnership kind of started when we went to Tim O'Brien's wedding and may have like done some substances, and we're talking an extra a lot about writing and like life and what we wanted to work on. I think we decided then we should probably like collaborate on something like screenwriting, I think was probably what we were talking about. And then a few years later, when I was going to the University of Texas, we actually really did it in earnest. I think maybe we messed around with some stuff early, but this was like, I had the fortune of being able to study screenwriting there as well as fiction. And so I took a crack at pitching your book that you were working on at Texas State as a premise for a feature. And so we wrote a film that they filmed in Texas like that summer.
2008.
Yeah, 2008. And then, I mean, then right after that, we were writing this, but we were writing it as a feature. And then, later it became a book.
I have a specific recollection of being in college during the 2000 election, Bush v. Gore. And I remember being in journalism school and sitting up at like 1:30 in the morning, watching Tim Russert and Tom Brokaw scribble stuff on their whiteboard and looking around at the other people and thinking, oh, it's never going to get any crazier than this. So glad we were right about that.
Happy 20th anniversary to that.
Thank you. With a few notable exceptions, like duos writing novels and writing fiction is pretty rare. Like Smith said it a minute ago, like I think it's maybe more common in like screenwriting or something like that. But this is supposed to be a lonely, solitary pursuit, you guys. Like, how do you guys make this work? Like, how does the nuts and bolts of the collaboration actually work?
Well, I think the fact that we started off writing screenplays really helped. I'm not saying like we wouldn't have been able to do it if we weren't if we didn't write screenplays first, but I really think it helped, because just the fact that screenplays are so Aristotelian, and they, you really, there's not a lot of wiggle room. There's right and wrong answers of screenplays, and you have to be able to create what's basically a rhetorical document, like an argument for making a movie. And it took us a while to teach ourselves how to do it, but once we learned how to do it, we really felt like we had skills that we could put to use doing the kind of plots that are useful in screenwriting, where you talk out the whole movie, you figure out every single element of it, you investigate all the plausibles, you talk about like all the world, and then you try to boil that world down to drama that then is on the page and on the screen. And I just think like that, the fact that we can talk so easily to each other, and that we don't have a problem like spending hundreds and hundreds of hours talking these things out. Like if you didn't have if you weren't able to do that, I would say it'd be almost impossible to write with somebody else, because you just have to engage with them, and make the world come alive sort of between y'all. And there's so much of the work is just figuring that out vocally before you even start writing any actual sentences. So that really, like, that's the way we wrote the screenplays, was talking them out and getting every single beat down and doing the outlines. And then that's been the way that we write the books too.
Yeah. The thing you made me realize or think about, and I don't know if this is entirely accurate, but it just occurred to me as we've been talking about this in other places, and is I feel like the long process of figuring out the story goes a lot faster when you have a partner, because nothing's being put down yet, so you don't have to agonize over deleting pages or but I really like this scene, but it doesn't fit any of that crap. You're just sitting there figuring it all out, putting it on giant post-it notes, or making an outline, or however you're doing it. So it's all disposable. So that's efficient, because you almost practice telling the story over and over to each other. So it's almost like an oral tradition. We're very Homeric. And then
the thing is, like, if it doesn't work, like, you can throw away stuff like really easily if it doesn't work, because basically instantly, because you have to sell it. It's like you have to sell it to each other and to the other one.
Yeah. But then I think the thing that might take a little bit longer, but is definitely easier and enhanced by the work you do outlining, is the writing. I mean, we did have to learn how to, but I think we instinctively knew, like, well, we know what kind of book we want this to be like, so let's go read those. We know what kind of research we need to do, so let's go do that. We know, and so we would be reading the same like we'd be reading. We'd think like, we want this to be like what we would say that we wanted an individual chapter to feel like it's got a wholeness and a thematic resonance, that it's almost like a really good short story. Like it could be like a published short story almost. That doesn't always work in the book, but that was the goal. Is like, but at the same time have a overarching propulsive plot. And so we were kind of we could talk about those things to each other, and know what we were talking about. Whereas if you're doing that all by yourself, and working out the plot and figuring everything out, like you don't have anybody you're bouncing it off of. So he might write, like, and we might write a draft, and then we know it's drafty, we know it's not there. It's like Chris Rock, like he'll do his like comedy without any of the Chris Rockness. Like he just tells the jokes for a while before he like is ready to do a set. It's that kind of thing. So you write the draft, and then you go, I know this sucks, but like, does it work? Are the beats there? And then we'll make it good.
Yeah. I'm sort of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of writer at times. I often say like I don't think I'm smart enough to sit down and like outline the whole book before I start writing it. Like I can do that,
Mhm.
and several times I have done it. I make an outline, but then when I get into the thick of it, I start to like different things obviously start to occur to me. I start to change things that then become like dominoes and changes everything else. But you may have already spoken to this, but it sounds like maybe collaborating in a duo forces you to be a little bit more structured than that. And I guess in addition to
Yeah.
that, is that different than how you write like when you're solo, Smith and Jon Marc? Do you still outline that meticulously when you're doing it by yourself, or does the process necessarily change when there's somebody else working on it with you?
I mean, I would say that I think that one thing, like we have, even though we do all this stuff on the front end, that doesn't mean that it doesn't change once you get into it. Like, so, I mean, none of it is really wasted work, but we have to do what you're talking about all the time, where we think we figured it out, we start writing, and then it's like, oh, actually, I just thought of something that doesn't work, and then it screws everything up. I think there's less of that when you really spend a lot of time outlining, but I think this has made me into more of an outliner. Like, probably, although I've always probably tended to like want to think about the overall like arcs of things, but I would do, this has made me in my own solo work like more sort of nitty gritty outline. And I mean, I don't really think there's a right and wrong way. I mean, there's some great like, I mean, Elmore Leonard did an outline, which is kind of amazing that he would just sit down and wouldn't know where the book would end or anything like that. So I don't really think there's a right and wrong to it, except I don't see how you could possibly do like, say, a screenplay without an outline. But it has definitely helped in terms of the genre that we have these constraints, and so there's certain things you just aren't going to do, or certain things you need to do because of the constraints of the form. And I find that very comforting, I think.
Yeah, I've become more of an outliner too, but I think that was learning screenwriting. I think we keep coming back to screenwriting, great for that sort of thing. But I also, I like to write off of the, by the seat of my pants, like when I can, but it feels like if you don't anymore, I don't know. I just need to know that what I'm working on is like got legs, or that I may fail, but the idea is solid. Like that I could describe the idea almost like a joke, like, and you would go, "Oh, good punchline," now make it funny,
That happens all the time, by the way, where we like whoever like decides to get the stuff down on the page first, it's sort of like, even if it's really bad, even if it's really like drafty, of course it's drafty, but like that person is actually doing the other person and the partnership a favor, because it's like they're getting the bad stuff down, and that is just sort of like the one thing you need to do in order to make it, you have to do that. And sometimes it's like, oh, I don't want to do this, like, but you do it. And then like, even if it's bad, that it's at least right, that that something along those lines has to be there because of the outline. And that just like, I don't know, it creates it's like a freedom or something, it like gives you the permission to fail in the sentences. Like the sentences are really important to both of us, but you can fail and then not like punch yourself in the face. Sometimes like when you're just writing and it's you alone and you're like, oh my God, this sucks. And who would want to read this? Who would want to write this? Why? But you have the outline. It's like, oh, this has got to be right. This just sucks now. It'll be better later.
Right. It's like things that you would do if you're writing by yourself, and do by yourself. You just maybe don't recognize it as process forward, or whatever word I'm looking for. It's not as evident, I mean, I think Antonio Nelson taught at taught a semester at the University of Texas, and she had this thing about, when you go in on a given day, have your setups ready, kind of like know what you're going to work on that day. And it's not always like golden prose day. Some days it's just go and fix all the repetitive words. Sometimes it's just make this dialogue snappy or what, whatever you're feeling you have in the right bandwidth, or it's just generating crap and just get it down and get out of there as quick as possible. So that's kind of like, I think we take whatever every writer does, but just have to communicate a little bit more about it to one another so that we know what the other one's doing every day.
I think my nerdiest writer question for you guys is whether or not this is also a triumph of technology. Like, in my mind's eye, you guys have like a shared Google document and you are talking to each other on the phone all the time. I don't know if you do it face to face, like here on the Zoom, but like, could you have written this thing like 25 years ago, or would you have been like sending it back and forth in the mail?
Yeah, which would have been hell. Like, because you need to be able to go in and, I mean, just like the computer itself, right? Just having completely changes the way we write. You can fix things immediately. And, when you read older books, it's kind of amazing to think like how did you do this? Because I can't, if I didn't have a cursor blinking there that let me move sentences around, so they must have been these giants, these people. Mental giants, because everything's incompetent when I put it down, and it's only slowly through working it. So yes, we got into the habit of emailing scripts back and forth that had dates on them, so, and there's a track changes feature in Final Draft, so you can see what the other person tweaked, like it puts a little asterisk next to it, just like in Word. So we could track things that way. And then when we moved over to Google Docs, I mean, it was just literally like open a chapter, write a chapter. We'd have to get separate docs for each chapter. And I mean, there's not, if you've used Google Docs, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing, it's just other people can get in there.
Yeah.
There's no way we would have been able to do it without Google Docs, both Google Docs and then some version of chatting on the computer, iChat and then FaceTime. It just would not have worked. I mean, I don't think it would have worked if we were in person either, because we just wouldn't. We probably distract ourselves when we're actually in person, because we'll just we'll be like, well, let's call it. You can actually go and like get a beer or like a hamburger or something. And so it's actually better that you're just like in your sort of normal workspace. You're like having to do the job. And then, if like Smith isn't able to work, I'm working, we can split the labor, and the Google Doc just allows us to do that, while also like being really elegant in terms of the thing. I mean, I know that all the changes live in the Google Doc, but we hardly ever look at them. We almost never look at them. It's not like Word where you're tracking changes and it's all there. It's like with the Google Doc, it just instantly does it. So we just forget. It's like, it helps actually to make it something that is neither one of ours. It's like, it's this thing. No one owns the changes. No one owns the words, and everything is towards like making the book as good as possible. And we just never, I mean, I don't think we've ever gone back and looked at any of the changes. We're just going for, maybe sometimes we'll be like, I took this out and I put it in a comment. Is there anything important, or do you, like we do, most of our talk to each other is through the comments in the Google Doc.
Yeah.
But we don't track the changes really.
Yeah, I don't, and I think, yeah, like if you're in Word or something, and you would be, this is getting really nerdy, but it's fun to talk about.
This is what I asked about.
Yeah. the track changes feature is really distracting, right? Because it's still weirdly proprietary. It's like, well, I did this. Do you approve? It's all very Microsoft like business, and Google is very business too. You know, check out a spreadsheet or whatever. But like the way it worked for us is as a collaborative document. It's so unintrusive. And so it, like Jon Marc was saying, it made it really easy for us to have a collective mind or expression on the page. We never, like I've said before, I think if we change, I might have started, at like the 5th time I changed something, thinking like, do you keep changing this back? Like, but not conscious of it, just eventually like giving up because it's like, okay, it's something, it keeps changing back, but I'm not even sure of that. I mean, I think like, it's just one of us does something and it's just trusted that, okay, you did what you thought was best with that paragraph or sentence or whatever. And so there you go,
All right, so tell me about Diane Harbaugh. She's obviously the star of the show here, a great character, a memorable character. Where did she come from?
She's interesting in that she's interesting to Smith and me because she changed so much over the course of this project. So we started, I'm pretty sure we started in 2008, maybe 2007, but somewhere around there, we started doing this, and it was a screenplay. It was like we were trying to go for the sort of like Jason Bourne kind of market, like a cool, hip, sleek thriller. And she was an antagonist of the hero. The hero was Carver, this guy who sold insurance to criminals, and she was an antagonist, like somebody who had worked with him and then that he betrayed, both like sort of romantically and also got her in lots of trouble with the law. And so she was after him, and she was she was out for revenge, but definitely a secondary character. And over time, she, as we said before, she like sort of slapped us and told us, I'm the most interesting character in this book. Like we wrote the most interesting character, and then we sort of didn't realize we gave the secondary character the most interesting story, and it took us years to realize it. And then once we realized it, there was no choice except for to make her the protagonist. And I mean, it sounds goofy. It sounds like something, that a writer would say, but she really did the character herself actually like made herself be the protagonist.
Well, part of this was a big part of it was a couple of things happened. One, first we were writing it as a screenplay. So it was very, the rules of the genre and the thing we were doing was very clear. It was just, we're writing an action thriller with this concept, and it's going to take place all over it's going to globetrot, and it's going to be cool, and your tastes change and you read more stuff, whatever. But that was kind of like the basic thing. And then when I published 4th of July Creek, I thought, man, like we could just write a book. Like, why don't we, maybe that's the shortest way up the mountain on this thing is just write a book together. And so that decision led us to this crazy thing where we wrote like what's called a partial. Like we wrote like a third of the book, and thought we got enough here and we got an outline. Maybe we can sell this. And so we did. And I was having these like anxieties about it. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I was just like, I don't feel good about this. I should be excited. We sold this thing, And when I went back and reread it, and I was like, we're doing all this backstory about like what was going on with Diane. We're doing a lot of exposition about the world. Like this stuff is literally boring me. Like it may be fine or conceptually interesting, but just on the page, I was over it, and it felt drafty, or I just felt like the focus was off. And then I was like, oh, we wrote the second book. Like we're writing all this backstory because we're too far into the story. And so we had this conversation. I'll let Jon Marc talk about how he felt about that. But we decided, okay, we gotta, and that's when the story really shifted and the protagonist shifted, because the draft of the book we had sold wasn't doing service to the most interesting character. And once we got into really rethinking it, it was clear, and we knew where to start. And we knew we had to start with her, and we knew she was our way into this world, and that was it.
Yeah, it was. That was. I mean, I'm really grateful that Smith figured that out, because it would have sucked to have to write the wrong book and to have a book that wasn't very good, because we had screwed it up on the front end. But it was difficult. We didn't argue about it or anything. It was just difficult coming to terms with it. I think. I mean, I think I maybe took like a day, maybe a half a day even.
Yeah.
But I mean, we almost literally had to rip up a check. And for me, personally, it was very difficult, because it was, from my own perspective, I had been through all these weird writing projects that had never really worked out. Like the novel that we turned into the movie, I never got it published. I felt like I was old and I didn't have a debut, and I was just it seemed like just that it was here's another thing that's not going to happen. That's how I felt personally about it. But that's the thing, when you have a partner, it's the good part of that is one, he was right. It was he made the right, he saw the thing and his diagnosis was correct. So, it's hard to argue, but it's also you feel, if it were just you personally, you could feel devastated by the waste of time and then the money going out of your hand, or probably you would just be screw it, I don't care. I'm going to go ahead and write this bad, wrong book, and then it'll just be a book and I'll forget about it. But you can't do that when you're in a partnership, because you owe it to the person and to the project, which sort of exists on its own outside of you. So I think, I mean, we just, it was once he told me, once he was able to hone in on what he was able to discover about what we had done wrong, then it was well, we're just gonna have to say no thanks, we'll come back to you later.
The thing was, I don't know if we discussed this or not, but we could have just said, okay, we're gonna go back to work, and we would have started over anyway. We would have realized it sooner or later. We realized at that moment, and so it was really just a question of how do we want to handle it. Do we want to? We had to tell people that we were starting over. I mean, it was we didn't really have a choice on that. And they were okay, cool, we'll come back when you have the book you want to write. That's nice. It was nice to meet you. It's figure it out, guys. So, we looked insane.
But it was money out of our pockets. It was there in our grubby hands, and then it was gone. So it was, those are difficult things to do. And, but it was absolutely the right decision. And I'm really grateful for it. And I just think that sometimes you got to do that. I mean, writers know you can't, the thing's going to have your name on it, and you don't want to put something out there that's not as good as it possibly can be.
Yeah. Okay, a specific question for each of you about the experience or the process here. For Smith, obviously you experienced some pretty wide literary success for 4th of July Creek. Why, taking a hard right turn into thriller town here, how did you come to the realization that you wanted this project to be your next book, when it sounds like there had been so many other iterations as screenplays and things like that? Why was this the project? Why do that?
Yeah, I mean, the shortest answer is, I think after working for over a decade, maybe on on my first book, which had its own crazy things where it was like 2 books at one point, and then I had to start over and realize that why things were, these projects always do that. That I think I wanted to just not do that alone by myself, and we had really built up a rapport with screenwriting and really built up a lot of our friendship is so good, and it just was like, well, like, why not, so that's kind of the answer. I mean, the other thing about it, the more like, I guess, artsy answer or whatever, is when, like, in grad school, I was waiting to write my novel. Like, I took a long time. Like, I wrote short stories and learned screenplays because I wanted to learn as much as I could in that while I had that environment, and just putting myself just into one book seemed like a mistake. Of opportunity. When 4th of July Creek came out and I wanted to explore screenwriting, that just seemed like a thing that I was gonna do that with him, and then when this project became it had its own life, it just seemed like it was just inevitable. Like, we had to work on it. We just had done so much work on it, and I had so much fun doing it. It was like there was no way it wasn't going to continue to be a fruitful thing. So, yeah.
And then for Jon Marc, tell me what the experience was like for you. You're coming at this from, a slightly different situation as Smith comes after it, like almost the opposite situation. This is your chance to introduce yourself to the literary world. Like, he's trying to have a follow-up. You're trying to have your debut. What's this whole process been like for you?
I mean, it's very weird because it's not really it's not a weird debut.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's also with somebody else, which is very strange in the literary, for literary books. So, like, in that sense, it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's just sort of my own, like, kind of, it's like part of my own weird path. Like, it took me many years to figure out I wasn't a short story writer. Then I wrote this gigantic book that I couldn't sell, but that somehow Smith and I turned into a screenplay that got actually made, and the film played at South by Southwest. And then we tried to sell screenplays, and we got some hits and stuff, and we had some good things happen, but we weren't able to really sell them. We worked on this screenplay for years, and then it didn't happen. I tried to write short stories again, which was a failure. And then Smith was like, well, let's just try to, why don't, he got an awesome agent, Nicole Raji, and then he sold the book, his first book, a really terrific book that everybody should read. I'll just plug that for right now. And he sold that and was like, well, I think we can maybe sell this as a novel. And I was like, whatever, let's try. It's not working we're not able to sell it as a screenplay, and it seems weird. It seems eminently sellable. So why not just dive into this? And then here I am, in middle age with my debut with another writer.
This other dude.
What's that?
I said with some other dude.
Yeah. So it's just like, I don't know. I mean, I feel lucky in a lot of ways. It's like, when you start writing when you're in your teens, and you go to an MFA program when you're in your 20s, and you have these big dreams, and then for virtually everyone it doesn't work out, right? And it's like, I do feel lucky that it's like I just was able to be fortunate enough to keep at it and deal with all these things that didn't happen, and then this one did. And so, it's weird, but I'm not gonna
Right.
turn it down.
I'd add one other thing too on that, is that the idea of like a writer it's true, you spend a lot of time alone, but the book getting, or whatever it is, getting finished, yeah, and all the stuff that goes into that involves a lot more people who are doing probably don't know, like, what am I trying to say? They aren't there for that whole journey, but they're incredibly important in isolating why chapter 11 is like in the wrong place, and you know why the title needs to be different, or why the cover is like this, or what, you know, any of that stuff. You're never crossing the finish line alone. You know, you get your name on the front, and so it looks like that, but you really are collaborating with a lot of people. So
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you got into this thing and realized that you were writing the second book and had to pull that stuff out. So are we doing a series here? Is there a future?
yeah. We're cranking on the next one right now. We're trying to, like our fantasy would be to have some chapters done that would go in the paperback, you know, like, but we have the outline and all that stuff. I mean, we just did our thing. We might have it might go easier this time. We might have a clue this time, this time around. So yeah.
You guys kind of did this backwards though, right? You're supposed to take your book and turn it into a screenplay. Like,
yeah. We're not doing a lot. Clearly, if there's one thing to take away from our little discussion tonight, is we're not doing it the right. Don't do it like this.
are you gonna go back and try to do a film or TV thing now, or has your experience soured you on that?
No. We there's always that.
Or hit us up. I mean,
yeah. We have tons of drafts for you to look at. Like,
Fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's the questions I have. Oh, Jessica's back.
Surprise!
hello.
Thank you all. That was really wonderful. Just a reminder to our attendees, down there at the bottom of the screen should be the Q&A button. Feel free to push that button and ask a question, and I can help translate that for our authors. But while you think of the good stuff, earlier, and we've sort of touched on this a little bit kind of throughout, this idea of the dual writer, and most of the dual writer projects that I can think of are in genre fiction. Do you think, and maybe this is more for Smith, having done the more literary fiction route, do you think you could do literary fiction as a couple, or or is there something strangely magnificent about genre fiction that
I think kind of the second thing, the magnificent thing, I think, is that it has sort of some baked in ground rules. So it makes it, there's a, you know, if you're going to do a literary, not like a real like work of art literary novel, you're shooting for that, you're probably, your references are going to be other books. Books are definitely made out of other books, but you're going to want to find that magical person who has that same passion for those 3 or 4 books maybe that you're writing in response to, or with, or in the traditional, you know, I mean, that's like the way I kind of look at the way those kinds of books come to be. Whereas genre fiction is just like, there's a gazillion of these books. They all have different variations on a theme, but they're all like punk rock songs, or they're all, you know, and so they just verse chorus verse, and you know what they're supposed to do, and you can mess with them. The other thing I'd say real quick is, you know, some of my favorite books, and we wrote an essay about this. Some of the books that we think of as like classics, I mean, almost all of them are crime books. They have a detective. Like almost every literary book that you can think of has some sort of like really like has a literal crime in a lot of them. That's the driving force of the story. So they are crime books. They're just not. It's a category, you know, and that there's aesthetics and all different kinds of reasons why it's that way. But I don't know. What do you think, Jon Marc?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to think of a writing team of literary writers. There's like, I mean, it's just hard to, it's very hard to think of any. And so, yeah, I do kind of think to some degree that like, there's something, you know, I think most of the way that we think about novels is like we are experiencing the consciousness of another person you know, within a book. That's kind of what literary fiction does. And I do think that it doesn't, you know, like we don't really, I think it might be weird for people if there are two people doing that. Although on the other hand, I also think that like some of that is I mean, it's all a fiction anyway. I think to some degree, it's like the lonely individual is a romantic fiction, and as you said earlier, there's all sorts of people involved, and you get ideas from all sorts of other places, you know. And so I even just the idea of an individual is not like, as that individual is not as individualistic, you know, as the idea. So but I also think that like the thing with so-called genre is that it gives you these restrictions, and it's like you have to have a murder, you have to have, you know, spies chasing each other, you have to have, like, I don't know, a woman running from a castle with her hair like floating behind her, you know. You have these things that you depend on, and it really you know, it really helps to make the story go. And what you said about the literary novel, like so many literary novels have that. You know, like setting aside like maybe just kind of like some of the high modernists, like, I don't know, Joyce and Virginia Woolf, maybe, like people like that, they may not quite have that, but like every single one of William Faulkner's books has at its heart, you know, some like thing that could come from a genre. And I would say the same thing basically for Toni Morrison too. You know, and so it's like these are high literary, right, you know, like the most literary of writers in the American tradition, and they write about crime and bloody things and cops and all the things that you can get, you know, from a decent TV show. So I think again, it's like a little bit of it's kind of a shell game a lot, where it's like this is literary and this is genre.
Yeah, like I mean, Ivy Pakota's book These Women is it's sort of been marketed as a genre book, but it's very literary and then I don't know, like Sarah Smith's book Mary Lou is Everywhere takes a missing girl but swaps it with the girl who replaces the missing girl in her adult mother's life. But there's this crime, this missing girl thing going on throughout the background of the book, and it's fascinating because you're living that experience, that kind of a crime, through the view of what the majority of us would be going through. That is from the outside, and she has a narrator who can kind of get inside the story, but in a very oblique way. It's super interesting. So that's what I think is like the literariness of it is kind of like what weird tweak did you do to it to make it. It doesn't follow the exact same rules of the genre stuff. You know that someone's going to get shot in the first chapter, and there's going to be a mystery, and that's genre. In literary, you never see the shot go off, but you just deal with the wake of the violence. You know,
which arguably is the trope of literary fiction. Like all fiction has tropes. It's not just the genre stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, it's that too is like I think people often, and not as much anymore, but you know, 20 years ago for sure, like people there was a lot of like genre fiction was really looked down on by lots of people, you know, and that it's like not, there'd be some books that people would say, sure, Elmore Leonard is a good writer, but you know, and I think that some of that has kind of disappeared a bit, and you don't have as much where like people look down on it. And they also realize, I think, that as you said, it's exactly correct. Like literary fiction is a genre, and it has like all these rules, you know, that you're taught, that in some ways are like stricter
right.
than genre rules.
But isn't it kind of, I think what it, for me, it just tells me how I'm supposed to enjoy a book. So if it's a literary thing, I'm reading it because I'm getting my mental vegetables. It's making me feel like I'm learning about, you know, I'm becoming a better person in some vague way or whatever. You know, it's serious. I'm smart. I get that. I'm being smart right now. And then when you read, you know, when I read like a thriller, I'm having fun. I'm supposed to enjoy. I'm supposed to be looking for the inventive, like act of violence, or the crazy backstabbing thing that happens, or the love triangle, whatever it is. And they're both entirely legitimate things for readers to do. I love them all, but that's what they're doing. They're telling you how to feel about what you're reading, and how to read it, and how to approach it, and in some sense that's telling you the intention of the writer, right? Like what kind of statement they're trying to make, or what kind of artistic thing they're shooting for, and then you can determine whether they hit it or not, and whether you like it, or whether you like that kind of stuff. So it's just like a rules of the road kind of thing that I find to not be as bothersome as I used to. I think when you're younger, you're kind of like, genre is disrespected, and I like genre, or I hate Stephen King, he's just a hack, and it's like, no, he's fantastic. What do you like?
Popcorn is delicious.
It is delicious, yes.
As I sit here in front of my children's bookshelves in my house.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that was as I was thinking about. I'm like, wait, they're like. Illuminae is written by 2 authors. Unearthed is written by 2 authors, but they're both science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see. I don't see that we have any other questions. Do we have last thoughts?
Last thoughts. I don't want to stop with thinking.
I'm like, do we need to do the rapid fire, like inside the actor's studio, inside the author's studio?
I was gonna say, I just one thing I thought of is I wonder if that some of this divide between the literary and the popular is really part of the American market, and it doesn't. I definitely don't think it applies as much to contemporary Mexican fiction, where like the literary and what we would think of as genre elements totally blend. And even like going much further back to like, say, South American fiction, like Garcia Marquez or Borges, like those, how does one, where does one like make those distinctions? So I wonder if it's just like, if it's more of a an American distinction that may or may not be as important in other countries or cultures.
Oftentimes, from a book selling perspective, it really just feels like marketing. Like,
yeah.
Do you want to market yourself as the like patched elbows, glasses, like literary fiction, or do you want to market yourself as the like grungy band t-shirt with your copy of Douglas Adams or however?
Right.
But at the bookstore, we also secretly wish we could have true and less true.
Right.
Hey, I like that.
That's how the bookstore is organized.
Chad, did you have that? Yours, like your first books, like was kind of historical literary, right? Yeah. As a category. And
I asked you that question, like, why would you do this hard turn into genre? But I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Nobody was more surprised than I was that I wrote a historical fiction as my debut. Like, I think it was kind of a one-off for me, really. Like, the Champion of the World is about professional wrestling in the 1920s, and kind of like united all the specific nerd centers of my brain, like all the stuff I used to like when I was a kid, like sports and pro wrestling, and then like kind of like old-timey carnival atmosphere stuff, and eventually felt like the book I just kind of had to write. And like I honestly thought of it as kind of a crime story anyway, because there's a lot of crime stuff in the book. There's like gangsters and some pretty genre type stuff. But I always kind of knew that I think my second book was going to be like a mystery or thriller, because that's pretty much what I grew up reading for pleasure. And still I like to read those books, and so I kind of wanted to try my hand at it. And I didn't necessarily think of it as being all that different than what I did in Champion of the World, except for that, like, it was my first time ever sort of like literally plotting out a mystery. So like to figure out like where the clues went, and like write it so that the reader hopefully figures out the mystery one page before it happens in the book. and all that stuff. So that was a little weird, but mostly it was the same. And I will say, like, when the publishing company was like, "Oh, we're gonna market this book as literary suspense," I was like, "Oh, very cool." Now, obviously, I know what that means, but could you just say it out loud just to make sure that we're all on the same page? Clearly, I know what literary suspense means, though. Right?
Country and Western. Yeah. I feel like a lot of real Colson Whitehead, is like written kind of all the things, seems like, I don't know, maybe he hadn't done a Western yet, but yeah, you're like, maybe, has he?
The zombie one could go,
yeah.
like, but then you're talking about the intersection of zombies and Westerns, which
right.
Walking Dead.
Yeah, very, very much. Yeah. But anyway, my point, the reason I brought it up was just like, I think that it seems like the world is better for people's imaginations than it used to be. If there's one thing that's like better now, and then maybe it's the one thing, is that, writers can, it seems like you don't have to, was it John Banville who always had that fake thriller writers? Yeah. He just stopped doing that. He's like,
a story just came out like this week that he's going to write a Benjamin Black book under his actual name.
Yeah, because why am I doing it's like why are we doing this? Why are we making these categories? So that's cool. I think people still want to know what they're getting into, so I think we'll always have them, but it's cool, like, that people can go and writers can do whatever they want.
It's weird though that there are still, like, I mean, one of our favorite writers is John Marc, and we both think that Smith and I both think he's basically like as great a writer as there is living. He's produced basically 20 really, really, really good books, but he doesn't get talked about the same way that, like, say, a Cormac McCarthy or a Toni Morrison or somebody like that. And I myself feel like he's pretty close to the same category, but they just, and like I said, I think both, say, Morrison and McCarthy are both like kind of writers that are extremely literary but also do a lot of genre-ish stuff, but still somehow here's Le Carre over here, and here's, and I guess Whitehead too. Like, Whitehead does this genre-ish stuff, but he's still a literary writer. And I mean, maybe it's right. It's just all just sort of marketing, and it's like, you're in this category and you're in this category, and that's just how it is.
Hey, the Eagles thought they were really heavy. Like, they thought they were a heavy band, and we're all like, are you? I don't know why I thought of that, but
Well, I'll share one comment that we have here in the Q&A section from Barbara, who says, as publishing and marketing of books begins to change due to COVID, as we are experiencing here virtually tonight, it's refreshing to read what we want. So her advice is to write what you want and the readers will follow. Thanks for all the fish.
That's right.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Again, if you haven't picked up a copy of Make Them Cry, you can do so at the link in the chat, or visit your favorite independent bookstore. You can also pick up 4th of July Creek or The Blaze from Chad Dundas there. We have more great programming coming from Books in Common Northwest. This Thursday, we are sharing a mountaineering biography from Joanna Garton. So join us again, follow us on Eventbrite, follow us on YouTube, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Good night, everybody.